Is there a place in time where logic breaks down and wonderment begins? Could that be somewhere at some time along an infinite line between the reasonable and the highly unlikely? Join us on a journey into the improbable.
Makeshift Stories presents Episode 293, Lagrange Point 4. Read by Kathleen Connolly. Opening and closing theme by Matthew Erdman. Somewhere and sometime, everyone can be wrong.
Beyond the thick glass, the larger weather systems and the blue oceans were the only details the naked eye could still make out. Experimentally, I held my thumb up to occlude the entire globe. Yesterday, it took 4 fingers. That's an amazing sight, isn't it? I jerked around a little too fast, spinning out of control until I bumped into the padded wall. It takes a bit of time to get used to microgravity. Mr. Chada, you scared me. You shouldn't sneak up on people like that. Dev Chada, tech billionaire, space entrepreneur, and darling of space enthusiasts everywhere, floated casually in the hatch to the cupola. An entire genre of video streams was dedicated to the man who could do no wrong in the eyes of his fanatical believers. If Chada suddenly decided the Earth was flat, some online group would form to ban globes from classrooms. I didn't mean to startle you, but it was precisely what he had intended. Amazing, isn't it? The Earth hanging there, just a tiny fragile island of life in the black void. I wish everyone could experience it from this perspective. What do they call it? He knew the answer. I wouldn't play along, so I left his stupid question hanging. Ahem. He cleared his throat, waited, and finally answered his question. The overview effect, right? More people need to have their frame of reference rearranged by it. Then you should have brought a few of your billionaire buddies along, I suggested. It would at least have provided a realistic goal for this mission, even if only one of them felt transformed enough to donate their lunch money to some worthy cause. The words just slipped out. I had been trying to restrain myself since being blackmailed into coming on this ridiculous adventure. Chada laughed. And maybe a few key politicians too. It's a good idea, Dr. Parker. Then they'd understand why humanity needs to unite, fan out, and become multiplanetary. That was Chada's goal, his stated public reason for building his nuclear-powered deep space transport system. Making humanity multiplanetary was Chada Deep Space Enterprise's slogan, and to pay for that, the company mined rare minerals on near-Earth asteroids. More people need to experience this, I agreed. Do you still think this mission is a pointless waste of time, Dr. Parker? Chada floated to the portal beside me to look out. We're not quite past the moon's orbit, he noted casually. I'm hoping you're implying there's a bus stop, galactic gas station, or something nearby where you can drop me off. See, that snarky attitude is one of the reasons I insisted you come, Dr. Parker. It was hard to turn down the invitation, when it was a condition of my research funding, I said with a thin smile. My endowment will provide you with a stable and predictable source of money so you can focus on your work rather than fundraising. You're the envy of the academic world right now. Next, Chada would say that theoretical research was obscure and at the bottom of the list for potential donors. I have heard this argument more times than I care to remember. While laudable, Lorentzian wormhole research wasn't exactly attracting the money your university needed to keep your program going, he said right on cue. Before I walked through the door, your department was in danger of being cut. Now, the Chada Department of Theoretical Astrophysics is the darling of the university's board, a big moneymaker. Chada's smile didn't reach his eyes. So, what's a little side trip to help your benefactor? Side trip? Nearly 30 million kilometers in 2 months? In my expert opinion, which you are paying for but not listening to, the object at Lagrange Point 4 is just a dense cloud of black dust with an albedo close to 0. That would account for the occlusions. The man stared at me blankly. You know, the stars your satellites have observed winking out? Ah, right, but the spectral analysis suggests it's emitting radiation, possibly black body radiation, which is one of the telltale signs of a wormhole, isn't it? Don't try to deny that, Dr. Parker. I've read all your papers on the subject of wormhole detection. The word you skip over every time we discuss this is possible, Mr. Chada. A possibility is something that might be the case, not is the case. The math suggests it's feasible, but we haven't detected one yet. I know, but maybe for once, you should take a chance and believe in your gut. I didn't get to where I am by playing it safe. I believe in my instincts. Sure, occasionally I'm wrong, but this isn't a business deal, Mr. Chada. Assuming the anomaly as a stable artificial wormhole is at best fanciful. The radiation we're detecting from it is so small it's in the range of instrument error. To go from that to an artificial wormhole created by aliens is a good hunch, Chada grinned. And thanks to me, you'll be the first scientist to study it up close. I'll expect an acknowledgement when you get the Nobel. What do you think of the Mangala? Chad asked, suddenly changing the subject. It's smaller than I imagined. I can't even find a place to get away for a few minutes of personal time. Chada's face flushed. It's the largest crewed spacecraft ever launched, he boasted. Fuel and the water jacket protecting your cells from being fried by cosmic radiation take up most of the volume. Like I said, it's, not as impressive in the flesh as in the PR photos. Maybe it's the wide-angle lenses that make it, more Chada scale. Kind of like the dark dust cloud we're headed to. The entrepreneur floated menacingly close. So close, the ship's aggressive environmental system couldn't scrub away the smell of his obnoxious aftershave. I'm not wrong, Dr. Parker, and I'm not alone. The protesters who tried to stop our launch believe the anomaly is more than dust. There had been protests outside the launch site. Chada's security had kept them so far away we couldn't tell why they were objecting to the mission. Initially, I thought it was the usual thing about billionaires throwing money away on pet projects while an ever-increasing number of people starved. I had not expected a well-organized group that had spontaneously arisen to halt Chada's mission to L4 and prevent him from inadvertently announcing humanity's existence to an aggressive, advanced alien civilization. Mr. Chada, we have a problem with our link to main propulsion. Arun, the Mangala's flight engineer, called over the intercom. Chada's smile vanished, and he launched himself off the wall and through the hatch. What does that mean? I shouted after him. You told me all the systems on this kludge of lowest bidder parts have been around far too long to fail. How could we lose complete control of the reactors and engines? Chada was shouting when I floated into the control cabin. Jaswinder, our pilot, Hayden, the mission specialist, and Arun, the flight engineer, were floating opposite him. They all looked angry. We've been through this before, Arun explained, exasperated. You approved the design. 3 control cables. The 4th was omitted to save money and weight. They were placed on different sides of the connecting truss to prevent a situation like this, Chada pointed out. What were the chances of all 3 cables being damaged simultaneously? Well, more than 4, which was the original spec, Arun complained. As I watched the tense exchange unfold, frustration and fear bubbled below the surface. We have 2 weeks before we need to start deceleration, Jaswinder said, calmly taking the tension down a few notches. That gives us time to work out a solution, so let's stop arguing and get on with it. Chada nodded. Jaswinder's right, let's work the problem. Something must have happened along the truss, connecting the crew and control module to the propulsion unit. Maybe a collision with some small particles? Something big enough to sever the cables but small enough to leave the superstructure intact? Could we have crossed the path of an old comet, Dr. Parker? He looked at me like I was one of his aides. I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, not an astronomer, I reminded him. You'd know as much as I do about near-Earth cometary paths, which is close to nil. Call your mission control people. They planned this trajectory, so they should know. What happens if you can't fix it? If we can't fix it, Dr. Parker, we'll overshoot L4 and eventually run out of fuel, food, and air. We're going to die? I gagged, feeling bile at the back of my throat. The 4 of them ignored me and went back to talking amongst themselves. Get the maintenance bot to check the connecting truss for damage, Chada directed. It appears to be parked on the far side of the break, Arun explained. So what? Chada growled. It's on the other side of the break in the control cables, Arun repeated impatiently. So we can't connect to it. And there's no wireless backup? The bot was designed to work around the reactors where the shielding would block radio signals. I'll need to do an EVA to find and fix the breaks. Making my way along the connecting truss, Arun's voice echoed throughout the ship. I hadn't been part of the planning, which had taken far longer than expected, so I was in the tiny galley drinking lukewarm tea from a plastic squeeze ball when the EVA finally began. I can see where the first break is, Arun announced between breaths. Wait, I'm moving around to the next side of the truss. There's one here as well. Heavy breathing. It doesn't look like an impact. I'm moving to the third side. Heavy breathing. That makes no sense. What doesn't make sense? Chada demanded. It's the repair bot. It's at the third cable on the engine side of the damage. It's frozen there. Its manipulator arm was cutting the cable. Say again. The bot cut the cables. It was deliberate. Arun's voice crackled over the intercom. Someone took control of the repair bot and programmed it to cut through the cables. I don't think they knew that slicing the wires also cut them off from the bot. Otherwise, they would have kept it on this side of the break so they could do more damage. They lost their connection with it once they severed the final cable, and it froze where it was cutting. Can you fix the damage? Chada asked. There was a long pause. Only one, splicing in pieces from the other cables. We won't have a backup. The Earth and Moon were just tiny pearls in the cupolus portals. I turned away to face Chada. So we're safe? The crew has gained control of the engine again? Yeah, he confirmed. We start deceleration tomorrow, but that's not why I wanted to meet you here. I checked the communication logs, and there were no unaccounted-for signals from Earth or evidence that a ground-based saboteur reprogrammed the maintenance bot. Which means the person who did this is on board. Why confide in me? Wouldn't I be the prime suspect? Chada rolled his eyes. Dr. Parker, I could barely tear you away from your work to come on this mission. Plus, it was the fear in your eyes when you realized we might not make it back to Earth. No, you've got too much you want to accomplish to throw your life away, so you're the least likely to have done this. What I don't understand is the willingness to die to stop us. And that surprises you? Look, you've convinced people the anomaly at L4 is an artificial wormhole. Don't you get what that means? Don't try and turn this on me, Chada growled. But it is on you. No matter how flippant, anything you say becomes the truth in the minds of your fan club. So it doesn't really matter what we find at L4. If we don't find an artificial wormhole, your believers will write it off as misinformation, mix in aliens, and the fear that they'll invade the world if they discover us. And that gets you the frightened, angry mob at launch. After the protest failed, a desperate few would be willing to go to any length to stop you from inadvertently ending human civilization. Put yourself in their shoes. What extreme would you go to? For once, Chada was silent, considering what I had said instead of shooting his mouth off with the first thing that came to mind. After a few moments, he said, aliens advanced enough to create a wormhole would have to be at least a level 2 civilization on the Kardashev scale. They'd need control of an entire star's output or know how to use antimatter or negative energy to poke a hole through space-time. And what does that imply about the scale of their technology to ours? I encouraged, like a grade school teacher. We're ants. And we want to avoid getting stepped on, I said, extending the metaphor. For someone in that mindset, this mission to L4 is about to bite the ankle of a cosmic giant when, instead, we should be scurrying away to hide like all the other smart ant colonies in the galaxy. That's who sabotaged the ship. Whoever it is believes they are sacrificing themselves to save the entire human race. But there's no proof they'll be hostile or treat us like insects. There's no proof we're dealing with a wormhole, I yelled, let alone an artificial one. But the sabotage is real. Now, do you see the problem? There are consequences when you make unproven claims. We floated for a moment, glaring at each other. Finally, Chada broke the silence. There'll be another attempt, he concluded. Yes, of course there will be. The following weeks passed slowly, the knowledge that one of us was willing to kill the others to prevent what they saw as a disastrous first contact hung over the ship like a dark cloud, suspicion flourishing in its shade. It was impossible not to notice an unusual twitch or whispered conversation without the filter of guilt coloring it. As a result, we kept to ourselves while tracking everyone else. The Mangala had become a panopticon. I was watching them, they were watching me, and we were all watching each other. "All crew, report to the flight deck immediately," Jaswinder called over the intercom one evening. As I floated into the main cabin, the captain's hands moved frantically over the navigation screen. Hearing me enter, she turned around, her brow furrowed with concern. "We have another problem." "What now?" Chada barked impatiently, forcing his way around me. I grabbed the closest handhold to stop myself from hitting the wall of the crowded cabin. "We've been drifting off course," Jaswinder explained, "ever since we repaired the control cable." "Let me see." Chada impatiently pushed the captain aside. Jaswinder made a rude gesture to his back, steadied herself, and then folded her arms. "Our course looks okay," Chada complained. "I double-checked our position manually. Here." Jaswinder handed Chada a tablet. "That's our actual location. The navigation system only shows our original projected course, not our real one." Arun, who had been intently studying lines of code on another screen, looked up. The program was patched sometime after launch. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. The modifications are subtle and well hidden. "First, we need to get back on course. Then we can figure out who did this." Chada looked accusingly from one crew member to another. "I can fix the navigation system," Arun volunteered, "but," he glanced nervously at Jaswinder and Hayden, "we're too far off course to rendezvous with the wormhole. We'll miss by over 100,000 kilometers, then loop around L4 and return to Earth." "Nonsense!" Chada glared at the crew. "We've got enough fuel to change course." "But not slow down," Jaswinder pointed out. "Sure, we could get to L4, but we would be traveling so fast that we would collide with," she looked at me, "whatever is there, not rendezvous with it." "So what?" Chada fumed. "Dr. Parker thinks it's dust. A little dust won't hurt us. The Mangala was designed to deal with small impacts. If you believe Dr. Parker, we'll just glide through it. But if I'm right, we'll be the first humans to leave the solar system." "We're not going to risk our lives to prove Dr. Parker's theory or yours, Mr. Chada," Jaswinder declared defiantly. Her crewmates nodded in agreement. "Parker, what will we learn from 100,000 kilometers?" Chada demanded. Not much. The science instruments were designed for close-range observation from a synchronous point. The critical packages won't work in a flyby. I guess we could still do spectral analysis, but that wouldn't tell us much," I admitted. "There, that's it then, is it? You're just going to let whoever did this win? Well, I'm not." Chada thundered, turned, and pushed himself out of the compartment. Chada retreated to his cabin, presumably to sulk. The crew remained in the control center to roll back the navigation patch so we'd know where we were. And with nothing to do, I decided to sleep. So, I was in my sleeping bag when I felt the push of the main engines. At first there was mild vibration, but then a low rumble carried through the metal bones of the Mangala. I ignored it, assuming the crew had fixed the navigation software and were making a minor course correction to optimize our loop around L4 and back to Earth. I was both relieved and disappointed. Relieved that we would make it home, and disappointed we would never get close enough to determine what the anomaly was. A not-so-tiny part of me had hoped Chada was at least partly right. I would have been the first scientist to confirm a wormhole's existence and study one up close. It was Nobel-worthy stuff. There was a sudden crash. Something dropped to what was now the floor, and I was pushed back so hard it felt like the bunk above me was crushing my chest. Alarms were going off. Shouts and curses echoed down from the control center. I tried to sit up but couldn't. The rumble became a roar. Everything rattled so hard that I was afraid the ship might come apart. But it didn't, nor did the pressure on my chest subside. We rattled along for almost half an hour before the cacophony stopped as suddenly as it had started. "All crew to the common area," Chada ordered calmly over the intercom as if announcing dinner and a movie. This time, I was the first to arrive. The crew drifted in one by one, each looking accusingly at me. It was apparent they didn't know what had happened. Finally, Chada floated in, smiling confidently. He anchored himself to a handhold near the hatch, forcing us all to turn to face him. "We're going to get our answers," he announced smugly. "I didn't spend billions and come nearly 30 million kilometers to find out nothing." "What have you done?" Jaswinder said through gritted teeth. "Use my executive override to do what none of you have the guts to do. The main engines have changed our course and we're now headed directly toward the anomaly. And yes, we can't slow down, but that doesn't matter. We'll solve this mystery with direct observation. That will make the good doctor happy." Jaswinder glanced around the room, then pushed off toward the hatch. Chada moved out of her way. "Go ahead. I've changed the access codes." He smiled. Jaswinder brought herself up short. "You're crazy. You're insane. You've killed us. And your little stunt with the control cables and nav system wouldn't have?" "What are you implying?" Jaswinder's face had gone white. "Come on. It was obvious it had to be all three of you. Otherwise, someone would have noticed." Jaswinder glanced at her crewmates, her expression suddenly hardening. They were carefully planned interventions to force us to loop around L4 and back home, not an impulsive, selfish act like what you've done. Our lives were never at risk. Humanity couldn't afford to let some egotistic billionaire close enough to that thing out there to risk our discovery by its builders. "Everyone stop," I yelled. "You're all insane. The anomaly is not an alien gateway and probably not a wormhole. It's most likely a cloud of low albedo dust, but we'll find out now whether we want to or not." I glared at each of them. "What I want to know is, will we still loop back to Earth if we survive the encounter?" Jaswinder shrugged. "Chada, at least give them enough access to the ship's systems to figure that out," I demanded. "No," he objected. "Well, watch them as they do it, Chada. That way you can ensure they can't alter your stupid course." We split into 3 factions, the crew, Chada, and myself. Chada watched the crew work through the figures, current position, speed, and remaining fuel. He even offered to help, but the crew refused. For his part, he wouldn't relinquish control of the Mangala. We were going to collide with the anomaly, come hell or high water. The next day, we floated in the primary cabin. The crew clustered together near the galley, Chada near the hatch, and I was in the only space left, the thin plastic barrier separating the space from the shower and washroom. Jaswinder spoke first. "Assuming the anomaly is just dust, we'll pass through it in 2 days. Then we can use what little remaining reaction mass we have to put ourselves in an orbit that will curve back to Earth in 2.5 months. But if we sacrificed a bit of fuel, we could do a close flyby instead of risking a direct encounter. It would only add a few weeks to the mission, but would avoid a collision if the anomaly turns out to be more solid than a dust cloud." "No, we'll be moving too fast to get the data we need to prove what is there," Chada insisted. "We're going through it." "You're insane. You leave us no choice, Chada." "Go ahead, mutiny. It won't do you any good," he said smugly, then left. Jaswinder looked at me. "It's dust, right?" "That's the most likely explanation with the data I have." It was not what they wanted to hear, and a day and a half later, I was even less sure. Everyone crowded around the science station as I worked. "We're only 6 hours out. You should be able to tell something," Jaswinder complained. The crew had locked Chada in the observation dome, the only place on the ship where they could jam a hatch shut, and then spent the last day and a half trying to break into the ship's control systems with no luck. "What's the data saying?" Jaswinder asked. I opened the window for the spectral graph. "Not a lot. The low albedo doesn't help, but I'm starting to see gamma radiation. I've used that to map a rough perimeter for the anomaly." Switching screens, I displayed the result. "That looks like a perfect circle," Arun gasped. "Dust clouds in space don't form perfect circles, do they?" "No, No natural phenomena would produce that shape, I admitted. And there's no radar reflection. Whatever it is, it's not a solid object. The dark gray color bothers me. How can it give off faint gamma radiation and not be there? It's more like a hole, Jaswinder concluded. We looked at each other and knew I had been wrong. We agreed to let Chada go free so we could watch our approach in resigned silence from the cupola. Our only accompaniments were the indifferent buzz of fans, the hiss of the air ventilation system, and the occasional beep from a control panel. I don't see an event horizon, Chada whispered. Negative energy in the wormhole's throat keeps it open and prevents one from forming, I explained. At least in theory. I guess someone else will have to confirm that now. So you're not expecting to survive this, Doctor? Chada noted sarcastically. It's still dark gray, Jaswinder said, directing our attention back outside. She checked the timer she had set up on the ship's communications screens and announced, 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, we all counted to ourselves. Then nothing at all. The fans continued to hum, and the ventilation system hissed. There were no alarms or the sound of tortured metal being twisted and ripped away by exotic forces. It's just dark gray everywhere, Jaswinder needlessly announced. We were all seeing the same thing. Are we still in the wormhole? Chada strained to look through the glass. There's nothing out there. Instead of answering, I pushed away from the portals and headed for the science station. Data began to flow onto the monitors as everyone else watched the nothingness beyond the thick glass. We've exited the wormhole, I yelled. Still not seeing anything, I jumped. Chada had drifted up beside me. Where is all the data coming from? He demanded. It's still just dark gray out there. That gray is visible light, an afterglow. An afterglow of what? As if he could interpret the data, Chada pushed me aside to look at the screens and then frowned. What is all this? Gamma rays, Mr. Chada. Gamma rays left over from an immense explosion, possibly the result of antimatter. I'm guessing that's how your alien friends created the wormhole, and it has done something strange. All matter at this end has been annihilated. It's like the fabric of space has been torn apart, and if these readings are correct, the event is spreading like a chain reaction at the speed of light. Chada's face went pale. The dark gray we saw from the other side was the space behind the wormhole, I confirmed. Then they, Chada stuttered, destroyed themselves. I nodded. It's looking that way. How far are we from Earth? Chada asked, suddenly understanding. I shrugged. Without stars, it's impossible to know, but the chain reaction will eventually get there.
You can help us create original content twice a month by heading over to ko-fi.com/makeshiftstories and making a one-time donation or becoming an ongoing supporter at patreon.com/makeshiftstories. And if you can, please leave us a review or rating wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps new listeners discover us. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. Makeshift Stories is released around the beginning and middle of the month. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Kathleen Connolly. Opening and closing themes were composed and recorded by Matthew Erdman. Audio production and editing by Vicata Studios. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial, attribution, no derivative license.